One of the new major features with Photoshop 2021 is the sky replacement feature. I can imagine this is going to be quite useful because you see this question asked all the time on the various different internet groups. How do I replace the sky? Well, there have been programs like Luminar which you've been able to do this for, well, a short while, but now Photoshop has got it. Let's see how it works. I have my background layer selected. Don't need to duplicate it because what we're about to do won't affect this layer directly. It'll add extra layers on top if you tell it to. But look, let's come to Edit, Sky Replacement. And you get this, and I will move this over because the problem you're always going to get with sky replacement is stuff like this. The branches of that tree set against the sky and you get fringing problems. And if I zoom in, I wonder if you'll be able to see it. But those are not nice branches to begin with in the first place. I'm just holding down my space bar to move around, or I can do it this way, but it's quicker to just hold down your magnifying glass, slide left or right. Can I find a good example? Yeah, you can see with this, there is a slight fringing problem where it's superimposing a sky over this image to replace the original sky, which was looking pretty dull. And I have to say, so far, it's done quite a good job, but you're getting part of the edges of these branches and leaves with an ever so just slight light-colored halo around there. That's always going to be the problem. And oh, yeah, look at this in the background. You can see it there as well, just against those trees in the distance. And along the horizon here, you can see that as well. But you can get better results than what we've got right at the moment. The first thing to do is to decide upon the sky you want, because you've got a choice. You've got blue skies, and take your pick of these. And this is a case of you just using your eyes to judge it, because some skies look great, some skies don't look quite as convincing. That could have to do with the angle that you took the photograph from, how far the sky recedes into the distance, blah, 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 blah. Like that, for example, isn't looking too realistic to me. What about this? I'm starting to get part of the original mountains in the background, because these are not some kind of magic sky images. They're just simple, probably JPEGs, which are being placed here. Now, this was taken at dawn, so let's try spectacular. Actually, that's not too bad. How's that working against here? Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3 down there. What about sunsets? Interesting. Let's go back to spectacular. And, ooh, got 1 or 2 dramatic skies here. What about this? That's more in keeping with the original subject matter. I wouldn't mind using something like that. That is looking okay. Well, it's looking quite nice, actually. But let's go for something a bit more dramatic, because basically it's going to leave me with more problems, which I can work on by moving the sliders around. Okay, so let's take a look at this. The scale is set to 100. I can make the scale bigger. I can make the scale smaller, at which point you start seeing the original sky layer, which I don't really need. Let's take that to what, 113? Okay, we'll do that. You can alter the temperature of the sky. You can make it a cooler color, like this, or you can make it a warmer color. Now, do you notice when I'm doing this, the sky is changing color, but also take a look at this wall here when I make the temperature a lot more blue and a lot cooler. That is changing as well. When we turn this out to some new layers, you'll see what's going on with this. I can flip this around like this, and I prefer it in its original direction, I think. I can alter the brightness of it, and I think I kind of prefer that a little bit because this is a dawn photograph, so maybe I'll go with something like that. Now, shift edge. I can shift the edge up or down. Now you see what happens when I start to increase the value. Take a look at the top of that, well, I wouldn't call it a mountain, but a pretty tall hill. If I set it to where it was originally, that's 0. You can see a fairly regular outline there, but if I move it much more so like this, it's starting to affect parts of that mountain. Now it comes to a certain point where it's just breaking down. But this is actually very useful because one of the things the sky is going to do is going to affect the look of the area around the horizon line or the hill line. And by shifting the edge, you can get a bit more sometimes of a happy meeting of the sky against the trees. If you look at those trees, for example, they're starting to look a little bit more natural against the sky. Now, what if I take it to these branches? Hoo-hoo. If I shift the edge in again, they're starting to cut into the branches a bit more, which is going to help with that fringing problem, but you can see the branches are starting to get a little bit spindly and a bit too thin. So this is going to be a bit of a balancing act. If I move it like this, for example, oh dear, you can see all kinds of the original sky peeping out from behind those branches. So I think one of the main keys to this particular effect is how you shift the edge to what extent. And I think about there is doing it for me for that, for those branches. Fade the edge is going to give it a softer edge. Let's zoom out a little bit so we can see the picture as a whole. Now the foreground adjustments, well, you can see the sky. It's being replaced, and it's doing it all using artificial intelligence, and it's doing quite a good job. It's recognized which bit of this image is the sky and replaced it. But what is especially nice about this filter is it's also taking into account what's happening in the foreground, because if you change the color of the sky, you're going to be changing what happens with the foreground. And you already saw this. You saw this wall here change its color based upon the sky in the background. And when I realized that, that was the point I suddenly sat up and took a lot of interest, because one of the most difficult things you have to do when you're replacing the sky is getting the sky and the foreground to play nicely with each other and look like they belong in the same picture. Look here, foreground adjustments. Lighting mode, multiply or screen. Well, that makes sense. Screen is going to make things lighter, and oh dear, it's done terrible things to that branch, but I'm sure there will be circumstances where screen works, but for now we need multiply. Multiply makes things darker, screen makes things lighter. Now the lighting adjustment, let's take that all the way down to 0. That's affecting the dark and light of what's going on in, especially around the hill line. So I suggest you adjust that to taste, maybe about there, because I do want to keep some of the haziness in the horizon. Actually, no, maybe make it about there. Color adjustment, if I crank that all the way up, the foreground colors are being heavily affected by the sky color. That's no bad thing. If I take it all the way down, they're not being affected at all. And that is what I'm talking about. You've got this light pink sky, and it looks like the buildings in the foreground and the trees in the foreground aren't being affected enough. So if I crank up the color adjustment, all of a sudden they're taking on the lighting of that sky. Okay, that's it in a nutshell, but now what I'll do is I'll output to either new layers or duplicate layer. Duplicate layer will just give you this layer with everything applied. I do not want to do that. I want a whole load of new layers, and I've only got one layer. That's my background layer. Watch what happens when I click on the OK button. Oh, look at all this. There's no new technology here. It is the process which is new, because what this is doing is using things like a curves adjustment layer. And if I was to move that around, can you see the foreground getting darker or lighter like this? So I can tweak that around to basically whatever I want. And similarly, what have I got here? I've got a color balance. That color balance is clipped to the cloud layer. If I move that around, I can adjust the tones directly like this. I'm not going to do that too much. Now, it's affected the midtones. Has it affected the shadows? No. Has it affected the highlights? No. It affected the midtones. But you can adjust the color balance of the sky. Now, if I show you what's happening with this, if I come to my sky layer and I Alt or Option click on the layer mask, that is the layer mask that was automatically generated by Photoshop. And if you remember with layer masks, whatever layer this is affecting, you only see the white bits, you don't see the black bits. So if I Alt click again, and if I disable the layer mask, that's my sky layer with the brightness of the sky, the brightness contrast layer, plus my midtones layer are all affecting the look of that sky. But then Photoshop generated a layer mask to hide all the bits that you don't want. So if I enable the layer mask again, you get that. Now, the reason you put it out to all these different levels is that, look, it's a lot to take in at the moment, I know. But once you get comfortable with things like levels or the color balance, you have a huge amount of flexibility just to tweak away at the effect. Like, for example, here. Let's make the foreground lighter, and only the foreground gets lighter, for example, or darker. Similarly, how bright do you want the sky? Well, we were adjusting this when we were inside the sky replacement dialog box. And if there's any 1 or 2 bits which it got wrong, like it didn't color in a certain part of the picture or it did when it wasn't supposed to, you always have the layer mask which you can come in and paint on to further adjust the image. So that's sky replacement. Hopefully this will reduce the amount of questions, which are, how do I replace the sky? Well, this is how you do it. It's fast, it's got options, you can import your own skies in there. And once you're happy with things like layer masks, and once you are happy with things like adjustment layers, this is going to give you a huge amount of flexibility with most of the hard work, i.e. the masking and matching up the colors, already done for you. So I must admit, I do like this new feature in Photoshop 2021. And I will see you in the next video.